All right, so one of the things, make sure that's going to go live. Yep. One of the things that I think led to my success as an undergraduate, I graduated with highest honors in my undergraduate program. And I think that one of the things that led to that was not so much that I was all that intellectually gifted, as it was that I was able to sort of see connections and to make these connections. So I took all of these classes and I could see how they all sort of came together. And so it's that ability to integrate knowledge that I think is really, really critical to success in an academic program. And also, I think it's also critical to success in life, in that what you're going to have to do when you go out into the business world is make these connections and understand how all of this stuff fits together. So I know when I was an undergraduate, a lot of people did this, and I did this in some classes as well. I'm not going to say that I wasn't one of those typical students who you would cram all of the knowledge into your head. For example, I remember taking physics. I did really, really well at biology. I could understand that, but physics, I just did, I could train leave Chicago and one leaves San Antonio, and they collide in, Kansas City, Missouri, and how far does the wreckage go, and who cares? Everybody's dead. I didn't find that at all useful, and so I didn't really like that. But biology, I really, really liked it. I did really, really well at biology. But physics, I got an A in that class. I don't know how I got an A in that class, but I would cram all of that knowledge in my head for the exam, and I would walk out, and students would say, what did you put on number 21 or something like that? And I dumped it. By the time the exam was over, that information just went right down the drain, and I had dumped that information. One of the things that makes business different than other courses is that these are not disparate disciplines that you can sort of dump. And so when you go out and you become business people, you will, even if you're not going to be marketers, you will have to understand how marketing, if you're going to be, God help you. I pray for your immortal soul if you're going to be an accountant. I can't imagine anything more boring. Why are you laughing? Are you going to be an accountant? I'm so sorry for you. But, if you're going to be an accountant, I feel for you, but you're going to have to understand why marketers look at things differently than accountants do, and there's a reason for that. Why we use those numbers and we use them in a different way, and it's being able to make those connections that's really, really critical. Well, one of the things that I like about this video that I'm about to show you is that it combines. It's a very useful illustration of how two things overlap. So it deals with marketing research, and it also deals with a huge ethical issue in marketing, which is privacy, and how those two areas can really overlap. So this is a TED Talk. I love TED Talks. How many of you watch TED Talks? Just love TED Talks. So by Alessandro Isti. I think you'll enjoy it. There is one, if you're easily, that's the wrong one. If you are easily, shocked, at the beginning there is one picture of Adam and Eve naked in the Garden of Eden. So I apologize if that offends you. You can close your little eyes. I'll let you know. It's coming up right at the beginning.
I would like to tell you a story connecting the notorious privacy incident involving Adam and Eve and the remarkable shift in the boundaries between public and private, which has occurred in the past 10 years. You know the incident. Adam and Eve, one day in the Garden of Eden, realize they are naked, they freak out, and the rest is history. Nowadays, Adam and Eve would probably act differently. We do reveal so much more information about ourselves online than ever before. So much information about us is being collected by organizations. Now, there is much to gain and benefit from this massive analysis of personal information or big data. but there are also complex trade-offs that come from giving away our privacy. And my story is about these trade-offs. We start with an observation, which in my mind has become clearer and clearer in the past few years, that any personal information can become sensitive information. Back in the year 2000, about 100 billion photos were shot worldwide, but only a minuscule proportion of them were actually uploaded online. In 2010, only on Facebook, in a single month, 2.5 billion photos were uploaded, most of them identified. In the same span of time, computers' ability to recognize people in photos improved by 3 orders of magnitude. What happens when you combine these technologies together? Increasing availability of facial data, improving facial recognizing ability by computers, but also cloud computing, which gives anyone in this theater the kind of computational power which a few years ago was only the domain of 3-letter agencies. And ubiquitous computing, which allows my phone, which is not a supercomputer, to connect to the internet and do there hundreds of thousands of face matches in a few seconds. Well, we conjecture the result of this combination of technologies will be a radical change in our very notions of privacy and anonymity. To test that, we did an experiment on Carnegie Mellon University campus. We asked students who were walking by to participate in a study. And we took a shot with a webcam, and we asked them to fill out a survey on a laptop. While they were filling out the survey, we uploaded their shot to a cloud computing cluster. And we started using a facial recognizer to match that shot to a database of some hundreds of thousands of images, which we had downloaded from Facebook profiles. By the time the subject reached the last page on the survey, the page had been dynamically updated with the 10 best matching photos which the recognizer had found. And we asked the subjects to indicate whether he or she found themselves in the photo. Do you see the subject? Well, the computer did, and in fact did so for 1 out of 3 subjects. So essentially, we can start from an anonymous face, offline or online, and we can use facial recognition to give a name to that anonymous face, thanks to social media data. But a few years back, we did something else. We started from social media data. We combined it statistically with data from US government social security, and we ended up predicting social security numbers, which in the United States are extremely sensitive information. Do you see where I'm going with this? So if you combine the 2 studies together, then the question becomes, can you start from a face? And using facial recognition, find a name and publicly available information about that name and that person. And from that publicly available information, infer non-publicly available information, much more sensitive ones, which you link back to the face. And the answer is yes, we can, and we did. Of course, the accuracy keeps getting worse. But in fact, we even decided to develop an iPhone app, which uses the phone internal camera to take a shot of a subject and then upload it to a cloud and then do what I just described to you in real time. Looking for a match, finding public information, trying to infer sensitive information, and then sending it back to the phone so that it is overlaid on the face of the subject. An example of augmented reality, probably a creepy example of augmented reality. In fact, we didn't develop the app to make it available, just as a proof of concept. In fact, take these technologies and push them to their logical extreme. Imagine a future in which strangers around you will look at you through their Google glasses or one day their contact lenses and use 7 or 8 data points about you to infer anything else which may be known about you. What will this future without secrets look like? And should we care? We may like to believe that the future with so much wealth of data will be a future with no more biases. But in fact, having so much information doesn't mean that we will make decisions which are more objective. In another experiment, we presented to our subjects information about a potential job candidate. We included in this information some references to some funny, absolutely illegal, but perhaps slightly embarrassing information that the subject had posted online. Now, interestingly, among our subjects, some had posted comparable information, and some had not. which group do you think was more likely to judge harshly our subject? Paradoxically, it was the group who had posted similar information, an example of moral dissonance. Now, you may be thinking, this does not apply to me because I have nothing to hide. But in fact, privacy is not about having something negative to hide. Imagine that you are the HR director of a certain organization and you receive resumes and you decide to find more information about the candidates. Therefore, you Google their names, and in a certain universe, you find this information. Or in a parallel universe, you find this information. Do you think that you will be equally likely to call either candidate for an interview? If you think so, then you are not like the US employers who are in fact part of our experiment. Meaning we did exactly that. We created Facebook profiles, manipulating traits, and then we started sending out resumes to companies in the US. And we monitored whether they were searching for our candidates and whether they were reacting to the information they were finding on social media. And aware, discrimination was happening through social media for equally skilled candidates. Now, marketers like us to believe that all information about us will always be used in a manner which is in our favor. But think again, why should that be always the case? In a movie which came out a few years ago, Minority Report, a famous scene had Tom Cruise walk in a mall and holographic personalized advertising would appear around him. Now, the movie is set in 2054, about 40 years from now. And as exciting as the technology looks, it already vastly underestimates the amount of information that organization can gather about you, and now they can use it to influence you in a way that you will not even detect. So, as an example, this is another experiment actually we are running, not yet completed. Imagine that an organization has access to your list of Facebook friends, and through some kind of algorithm, they can detect the 2 friends that you like the most. And then they create, in real time, a facial composite of these 2 friends. Now, studies prior to ours have shown that people don't recognize any longer, even themselves, in facial composites, but they react to those composites in a positive manner. So next time you are looking for a certain product and there is an ad suggesting you to buy it, it will not be just a standard spokesperson. It will be one of your friends. And you will not even know that this is happening. Now, the problem is that the current policy mechanisms we have to protect ourselves from the abusers of personal information are like bringing a knife to a gunfight. One of these mechanisms is transparency, telling people what you're going to do with their data. And in principle, that's a very good thing. It's necessary, but it is not sufficient. Transparency can be misdirected. You can tell people what you're going to do, and then you still nudge them to disclose arbitrary amounts of personal information. So in yet another experiment, this one with students, we asked them to provide information about their campus behavior, including pretty sensitive questions, such as this one. Now, to one group of subjects, we told them only other students will see your answers. To another group of subjects, we told them students and faculty will see your answers. Transparency, notification, and sure enough, this worked. In the sense, the first group of subjects were much more likely to disclose than the second. It makes sense, right? But then we added the misdirection. We repeated the experiment with the same group, this time adding a delay between the time we told subjects how we will use their data and the time we actually started answering the questions. How long a delay do you think we had to add in order to nullify the inhibitory effect of knowing that faculty will see your answers? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? 1 minute? How about 15 seconds? 15 seconds were sufficient to have the 2 groups disclose the same amount of information, as if the second group now no longer care for faculty reading their answers. Now, I have to admit that these talks so far may sound exceedingly gloomy, but that is not my point. In fact, I want to share with you the fact that there are alternatives. The way we are doing things now is not the only way they can be done, and certainly not the best way they can be done. When someone tells you people don't care about privacy, consider whether the game has been designed and rigged so that they cannot care about privacy. And coming to the realization that these manipulations occur is already halfway through the process of being able to protect yourself. When someone tells you that privacy is incompatible with the benefits of big data, consider that in the last 20 years, researchers have created technologies to allow virtually any electronic transactions to take place in a more privacy-preserving manner. We can browse the internet anonymously. We can send emails that can only be read by the intended recipient, not even the NSA. We can have even privacy-preserving data mining. In other words, we can have the benefits of big data while protecting privacy. Of course, these technologies imply a shifting of costs and revenues between data holders and data subjects, which is why perhaps you don't hear more about them. Which brings me back to the Garden of Eden. There is a second privacy interpretation of the story of the Garden of Eden, which doesn't have to do with the issue of Adam and Eve feeling naked and feeling ashamed. You can find echoes of this interpretation in John Milton's Paradise Lost. In the garden, Adam and Eve are materially content. They're happy, they're satisfied. However, they also lack knowledge and self-awareness. The moment they eat the aptly named fruit of knowledge, that's when they discover themselves. They become aware. They achieve autonomy. The price to pay, however, is leaving the garden. So privacy, in a way, is both the means and the price to pay for freedom. Again, marketers tell us that big data and social media are not just a paradise of profit for them, but a Garden of Eden for the rest of us. We get free content, we get to play Angry Birds, we get targeted ads. But in fact, in a few years, organizations will know so much about us that we'll be able to infer our desires before we even form them, and perhaps buy products on our behalf before we even know we need them. Now, there was one English author who anticipated this kind of future where we would trade away our autonomy and freedom for comfort. Even more so than George Orwell, the author is, of course, Aldous Huxley. In Brave New World, imagine a society where technologies that we created originally for freedom end up coercing us. However, in the book, he also offers us a way out of that society, similar to the path that Adam and Eve had to follow to leave the garden. In the words of the savage, regaining autonomy and freedom is possible, although the price to pay is steep. So I do believe that one of the defining fights of our times will be the fight for the control over personal information. The fight over whether big data will become a force for freedom rather than a force which will hiddenly manipulate us. Right now, many of us do not even know that the fight is going on, but it is, whether you like it or not. And at the risk of playing the serpent, I will tell you that the tools for the fights are here, the awareness of what is going on, and in your hands, just a few clicks away. Thank you.
So, there are a couple of ways that you can know, as interesting as this is, that it's already out of date. So if you can tell me one of the ways that you can tell that this movie or this video is already out of date, let me know. You get bonus points on your next exam. Yes.
A little grainy.
What?
Grainy videos.
No? No.
The Facebook logo?
The Facebook logo? What's wrong with the Facebook logo?
It's kind of like spelled out in just the app, but it's more curly.
Okay, all right. So Facebook is now they're not having the whole thing.
Those
Spelled out.
those were the beginning stages of facial recognition. Now, like the phone, they can know it's you opening it without.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Those are both good observations. One way is he talks about Google Glass, and you all don't even know what Google Glass is because it never got launched. It was a big failure. People thought it was freaky. So, if you talk, you get the bonus points for trying. Come make sure you see me after class to get those. One of the things that the picture that he showed a woman holding a baby, and this is can be devastating. I'll give you an example from my own professional career. Before I got the PhD in marketing, I was an attorney, and luckily for me, I always had a job at a well, I started out being the attorney for the University of Central Oklahoma. That was my first legal job, and then I became an attorney for a publicly traded company, and their executive vice president. But if you wanted to go into a law firm, which a lot of my friends did, you had to have a certain number of billable hours. How many weeks are there in a year? There are 52. If you multiply 52 by 40, what do you come up with? If I did my math correctly, it's 28. That's how many hours there are in a work year. And multiply 52 by 40. If you take out the standard vacation, which is what do most people get for standard vacation? It's one of the reasons that I don't work in the private sector anymore, because I like vacation. We get a lot of it. You know, if I don't want to teach in the summer, I can get 3 months off. We get 1 month off between the fall and spring semester, so you get lots of vacation. But in the standard working world, how many weeks of vacation do you get a year? Huh?
Is it 8?
No. 2. So how many hours is that? That's 80. So you subtract 80 and you're left over with what? 2,000 hours. Most law firms in Oklahoma City, if you want to make partner, you're going to have to bill 1,900 hours or more, which leaves you with a whopping what is left over at the end of the. You're going to have to bill 1,900 hours. That leaves you with 100 hours that you're not having to bill for that time. You cannot possibly bill for every second that you're at work. So if you're going to bill 1,900 hours, how many hours do you think you have to work a week? If you want to bill for 40 hours, how many hours do you have to work? You think? Or more. If you're a young attorney and you don't know very much, and you're having to mark down because you're having to do research that you shouldn't have to do because you should be up to speed, you're having to write that off because you only can bill for what a competent attorney should be able to bill for that time. So you're going to have to work 80 hours a week, at least starting out. Now, when law firms interview women, they don't say, we don't hire women who have children, but it's just a simple fact. There's 2 tracks in a law firm that they talk about. There's the partner track and there's the mommy track. And if you take the mommy track, you're never going to make partner, because what? You're not going to build. You're not going to. I mean, it's just an objective measure. You either made the 1,900 hours or you didn't. And so a lot of women have chosen that go into big law firms have chosen either to not have children or to delay childbearing until they've made partner. And so these kinds of things with research that we can do as marketers have an impact on real people's lives. So it's important. So marketing research and the ethical implications of it are absolutely important. So marketing is both an art and a science. We talked about that at the beginning. So this is a way of circling back and reemphasizing that. If we think that something's a science, well, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to study it from a scientific perspective. What does that mean? Well, we're going to use the scientific method. It was developed in the 17th century, and it's based on empirical evidence, quantifiable evidence that we can count. It should be testable. And a hallmark of science, and one of the things that has been roundly criticized by a lot of people in marketing, is that we don't do enough replication studies. And why is that? Why do we get results and we don't necessarily go out and replicate those results again and again? Why is that? Well, because replication studies generally don't get published. And if you are a scholarly academic, which is what I am, and you are trying to, now I have tenure, but if I want to get promoted to full professor, so the ranks go from, if you don't have a PhD, you generally start out as an instructor, and when you get your PhD, you're promoted to assistant professor, and then after a certain length of time, you're eligible for tenure and promotion. Usually you go up to the first benchmark together at most schools, so you go up for associate professor and tenure at the same time, which I got. I got to be an associate professor and I got tenured, but if I want to make full professor, I'm going to have to continue to publish. And in order to publish, you have to contribute an extension of the knowledge that's out there. And so we don't have a lot of replication studies because replication studies generally don't get published. And it is a problem. One of my professors at New Mexico State, his major professor in his postdoctoral program was a guy named Brian Wansink. And you all have never heard of Brian Wansink, but you have been influenced by the findings that Brian Wansink did. He was a branding scholar at Cornell University in New York, and he did all kinds of food studies. And so one of the things that he said was, if you use smaller plates, people eat less, and it's called nudging. And they talked about that in the video, nudging. We nudge people to give you the information that we want. Well, we do that in public policy as well. So Brian Wansink came up, he got all of these grants from the National Institute of Health to do all of this research on food and brands and what we eat. And what he came up with was that if we do certain things, we get certain behavior. So if you take away, for example, in a cafeteria, the trays, that was one of the things that they came up with. If you take away the trays, people eat less, because what?
You can hold those.
You can hold less. If you don't have a tray, what are you going to be able to hold? One plate and your glass, your drink, right? And you're less likely to go back to the buffet. But if you can load up an entire tray, well, it turns out a lot of his research was predicated on some shoddy methodologies, and it got found out, oddly enough, by a graduate student who was encouraged to sort of take data sets that he had and compile and look at them to do data mining. And a lot of his findings have now been recalled in a lot of the publications. And this guy that was a professor at New Mexico State in my program, he was a co-author on a lot of these papers, and they got recalled. And so they took away his tenure and his New Mexico State. They took away his tenure and his promotion, and he's no longer in academics anymore. And so we have to, as scholars and as scientists in marketing, we have to be aware of this null hypothesis and the idea that we may be wrong when we find certain results. And we have to be very careful. That's part of science, is being very, very careful with your methodology and attempting to come up with the best results so that you don't have false results reported. So you have to be very, very aware of what Karl Popper called the science of refutation. So Karl Popper said the only thing that we can really call science is, the null hypothesis, proving the null or disproving the null. So for example, if you start out with a hypothesis, all cows eat grass, what are you going to do to prove that? Well, you're going to go study lots of cows, right? And the minute you find one cow that doesn't eat grass, you can say, well, you can refine the hypothesis. Most cows eat grass. So you go from there. So the scientific method, what does it begin with? Well, it starts with observations. When I ask this question, students oftentimes say it starts with a hypothesis. Well, what leads to the hypothesis? Well, you have to observe. What is it that I see? One of the things that I think is sort of a law-like generalization in marketing that you can take to the bank is that, and there's a great salesman, since I teach sales, a sales guru who used to say, people hate to be sold, but they love to buy. And I think that's true, particularly the part about they love to buy. And we know from looking at physiological research on individuals that when you buy something, the same part of the brain that's triggered when you take a drink, when you smoke the cigarette, when you do all of those things that make you happy, is triggered by buying. So money can't buy happiness, but it can delay depression. We know that. You will feel happy. It's one of the reasons why home shopping networks work so well at 2 a.m. for those of you who have insomnia. You're buying all this stuff. So people like to buy. So we observe that people like to buy. Think of interesting questions. Why does that occur? Why is it that people like to buy? Well, I don't know. We came up with some hypotheses. Why is it that people like to buy? We now know, as a result of refining the research, that when you buy stuff, the same parts of the brain that are triggering, the same chemicals that are released are those same chemicals that are released when you do things that, again, make you happy. You like to take the drink. Or for those of you who are runners, I never got this. I've been a runner until I broke my hip for most of my life because I like to drink beer. And so if you like to drink beer, you have to run so that you don't, gain a whole bunch of weight. Now I have to do the elliptical or do something else because I can't run anymore after having my hip pinned and decompressed, which is a sad thing. But I never got that. I never got the high from running. I just ran because I wanted to drink beer. And people say, "Oh, you're not running enough." Well, I've run since I was 13 years old. I've run a half marathon. I don't think that if you run a half marathon and you haven't felt that runner's high, you're probably never going to get it. But for those people who do experience it, and I've had friends who tell me that it's just the greatest, that you just feel like you can keep going forever and ever and ever. Once you hit that point where the endorphins release, that's a physiological reaction that happens in your brain that releases chemicals and causes that endorphin rush. And that's what makes you happy. And so the same kinds of things, when we look at your brain patterns in fMRI technology, occur when you buy things, the same kinds of reactions. So we now know that. But we could have, before we had the ability to look at fMRI technology, we could have come up with hypotheses about why it is that people like to buy things. Why do you think that is? Why is it that communism failed in most places? Why did communism is everybody owns everything equally, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And it sounds nice, doesn't it? But it doesn't really work in practice because people like stuff. We build monuments to our stuff. It's called our house. Look at Edmond, the land of the shallow and pretentious. Does anybody need a McMansion in a gated community? No. Why do they have 4 bedrooms? Does anybody actually go and stay with anybody when they travel anymore? I mean, in the good old days, back in the day, your grandparents might have gone and stayed with friends and stuff like that when they traveled. But anymore, people do what? If they're civilized, you don't impose yourself on your friends. You go what? You stay in a hotel. So do they need 4 bedrooms? No. Why is it that they have? Because they like their stuff. And have you ever noticed that somebody else's stuff is crap? But your stuff is stuff. Move your crap so I can put my stuff here. So we like stuff, right? So we can come up with a hypothesis that people like to own things. It's a way of saying something. It's an avenue of expression. Come up with hypotheses. Then we develop testable predictions. We gather the data, and then refine or reject those. Then try to develop theories about what happens, and then the cycle, of course, repeats. Our observations, it keeps going. So marketing research is the process of defining the marketing problem or opportunity and systematically collecting and analyzing the information and recommending actions based on that collection process and analysis. So what are the challenges? What makes marketing challenging? What makes marketing as a science challenging? A lot of times people say things like, It's not rocket science. Marketing isn't rocket science. And my response to that is no, it's a hell of a lot harder than rocket science. Rocket science is physics. Rocket science operates within very well-defined. I realize that the math looks really, really complicated. It looks really, really hard. I mean, even if we take simple things, like, I don't know, a simple formula, students just get horrified. Let's take something like, anybody know what this one is? Lowercase sigma equals the square root of uppercase sigma xi minus the mu squared over n, where I equals 1 to the n. It's what?
Population sample.
It's the standard deviation, yeah, it's the standard deviation. Like, and this looks really like complicated, right? I mean, like students, like, oh God, I hated stats. Didn't you hate stats when you took it? You usually don't see this because we usually don't get an entire population. If we talk about a population, it's really hard. They're going to, in a year from now, start collecting data in something called a census, and it won't really be a census. It will be a really, really big sample. And why won't it be a census? Because it's impossible to actually count. If they try really, really hard, I mean, they go under bridges and look and count homeless people. They try to, but there are just some people that will not answer they won't answer the door when the government comes. Why is that? Because they don't want to be counted. They don't like the government. They're afraid. So it's really just a big, big sample. But you know, compared to rocket science, this is a relatively straightforward and easy formula, and students still hate it. But if you think about it, it's really, I mean, if you know the order of operations, if I give you a data set, a set of numbers, and I say this represents the population, let's say, we start out with a data set, let's say we're going to do a census, we could do a census in this classroom. If we define our population, so a population is, by definition in science, a well-defined collection of units. So what is a well-defined collection of units? Well, I could say everybody enrolled in marketing 1113 in section 1123-4, which is, I think, the section number for this class. That's going to be our population. Right? Now, we could very easily take a census in this because we've got a very limited population. We could easily get a census of this classrooms of everybody's age. Right? We could just go around and I could ask you for your age. And I give you that data set, and if I give you those numbers, if I collect it secretly so that nobody knows that you're really ancient of days and you know, not supposed to be here or whatever. And I give it to everybody. Everybody should, at the end of the time that I give you to calculate it, should have what? And again, I apologize. I got this echo. Everybody should have the same number, shouldn't they? We should all come up with the same number. That's like rocket science. Rocket science operates within these very well-defined parameters. The things that make marketing research really, really more difficult than rocket science, it's not rocket science, it's a hell of a lot harder, are that it really is hard when you're dealing with people to come up with these very tight parameters. And so I'll give you an example here from my own research in my dissertation. This is a question that's found, it's a widely used instrument. This is maybe one of the most widely used instruments in ethical research concerning individuals and their ethical ideology. It's called the EPQ, the Ethical Position Questionnaire. And it was developed by a guy named Forsyth. And one of the questions is, he asked this question: rigidly codifying an ethical position that prevents certain types of actions can stand in the way of better human relations and adjustment. Now, this is a widely used instrument in ethics research. Literally, it has been used in thousands of studies. And there's a problem with this question. What's the problem with this question? This is worth big bonus points if you can come up with the right answer for this one. There is an absolute right answer for this one. This will be worth 10 bonus points if you can come up with what's wrong with that question.
It's a statement.
You can ask lots of statements. You know, and people, so what we do is we give you this statement and then we ask you to rate your agreement with the statement on something called the Likert scale. So it usually goes from like agree, which would be 1, or you can do it the other way. Slightly agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree, or slightly disagree, or strongly disagree, something like that, right? So, and I can't remember I think actually this DPQ uses a Likert scale of 7.
I'm just yeah, the certain type of actions part, I feel like it's vague.
Certain types of action, okay, I'll give you some points for that. That could be, you know, it could be vague in terms of what are you talking about in terms of actions. Anybody else want to take a shot at it?
Is it necessarily ethical all the time?
No, that's not it. You can say, I mean, we can make judgments. We talked about this in ethics. We can say, a duty ethicist would say all the time. For a duty ethicist, there is right and wrong. It is black and white, and it's that way all the time. And that's not necessarily problematic. It's problematic in practice, but in theory, I mean, as far as being logically sound, there's not a problem with that.
Could the question be too broad all the way around to get like a solid answer out of someone?
Not necessarily. You can ask really broad questions, and because you're asking for people's agreement with a statement, and that can have varying degrees, and so you measure that through the scale.
Is it possibly that better human relations and adjustments, like that's like subjective or like?
Okay, I'm gonna give you the points because that's the part that really is problematic. It's these words right here, better human relations and adjustment. That is really problematic because it's a double-barreled question. It's asking about two things that are not necessarily the same, right? Better human relations is one thing. What is that? What is better human relations? What does it mean to have human relations?
Acquaintances, friends.
Yeah, it means how well you relate to other people, your acquaintances, your friends, your peer group, your teachers, society in general. That's one thing. You could be lousy at that and still be well adjusted. There are people who are extremely introverted. Accountants, right? They just love those numbers. They don't want to talk to anybody. Just give me a set of books to balance and I'm happy. God help you. Maybe they're not. My brother's a tax attorney. Both my brother and I became attorneys, and he became a tax attorney before he went to law school. He got a degree in accounting, and he sat for the CPA exam, so he's an accountant as well as a tax attorney. And I think he's fairly social, but he's the odd one out, right? He's the exception to the rule. Most accountants that I know are not, they're just sort of, they're mild-mannered and not all that outgoing. So you could have horrible abilities to relate to other people and still be well-adjusted. If we went through the MMPI, we could say, this person they don't really have any psychoses. They're happy. They're just absolutely, they sit there with their 10 key and they're just as content as a duck in water. So they could be well adjusted and have poor human relations. And the converse could also be true. You can be a sociopath. Sociopaths generally have really good human relations. That's why they're sociopaths. They're good at manipulating people. They're generally likable. There's a book out called The Sociopath Next Door. So it's a double-barrel question. So that's the problem with this. So what is it that we can know when we talk about human beings? Things like this become problematic because you're asking two different things. And this is one of those instruments that's widely used. There's also the issue of bias. How frequently do you brush your teeth? If you ask people that question, most people are going to say what? We've been trained over and over again. How many times a day should you brush your teeth?
2.
Twice a day for how long? It's 2 by 2. Yeah, twice a day, 2 minutes. And if you ask people that, they're going to tell you what? I brush my teeth every day for 2 minutes. How many of you actually do that? I actually do because I have an electric toothbrush that tells you when the timer, right, goes off. It's been 2 minutes. Actually, mine actually tells you when you should move to each part of your mouth. It stops vibrating every 15 seconds or every 30 seconds. So that you know how you should move to the next portion of your mouth. But if you ask people that, they're going to say, I brush my teeth, twice a day. Then there's a disconnection between desire and action. There can be a multitude of reasons. People may want something, they may desire to do it. They may want to brush their teeth 2 times a day, but they may not actually take that action. So those are challenges to the research. The steps in the process. Define the problem. So based on our observations, we're going to say, well, what is it, that we need to do? Why is it that companies, and it's estimated that large companies need to constantly be coming up with, they need to be generating about 25 ideas a month to be on their game, to be staying relevant. Even things that are enormously historically commoditized, which means there's very little differentiation between them, are now differentiated. When I was a kid growing up, there was basically 2 types of milk. There was skim milk and there was whole milk. That was it. You didn't have a whole lot of other stuff in between. What do you have now? You have 2% milk, 1% milk, chocolate milk. You can get strawberry milk. You can get almond milk, soy milk, lactose-free milk. I mean, there's all these differentiations. So we set our research objectives, which should be specific and measurable. What would be an example of something that would be very specific but not measurable? One of the things that is interesting about the United States is of all of the Western nations, the United States is the most religious. In other countries, more and more people are becoming atheists or saying they don't know and they don't go to church. Why is that? Because in places like in England, the Queen, who is the head of state, she is the sovereign, she's also the what? What is the Queen also known as? The defender of the faith. She is the head of the Church of England. So the Church of England is state supported. And as a result, they don't have to market. In the United States, churches are not state supported, so they have to market. It's one of the reasons that Metro Cult out here, or Life Cult, whatever it is so popular. Joel Osteen, who knows nothing about theology, by the way. It's a horrible person, in my opinion. Evil, just can't stand Joel. Has no idea about theology, has never taken a course in theology. Says things like, if you don't have it, God doesn't want you to have it. You don't need it. Really, Joel? Let me take you to the Wynn's house in Oklahoma City. And you tell, the 16-year-old who's been thrown out of her house because she got pregnant and is HIV positive because she had to sell her body to pay rent. And now as a child, it's infected. Tell her she doesn't need cocktail, Joel. Yeah. It's the epitome of evil, in my opinion. That gospel of wealth crap. But it's popular because he's a good marketer. So what would be an example of something, so we're gonna measure from marketing perspectives, whether or not people believe in God. Now, part of that could be one of the interesting questions that would be a very specific question does God exist? That's a very specific question. Can you measure it? You can measure whether or not people believe, but could you ever measure whether or not God, I mean, there are three arguments for the existence of God, none of which, I will tell you, are very intellectually satisfying. So that would be an example of something that would be very specific, but very difficult to measure. Three types of research. You've got exploratory, when you're first trying to get an idea of where the market is. What is it that people want? Descriptive, how often? And then causal. And generally speaking, what we want to know is, if we do this, will people buy it? Is there a causal connection? If we bring a product to market and we advertise it correctly, will people be interested in that product? Will they buy it? Then you identify actions and specify your measures of success. Then you develop the research plan, identifying constraints or limitations. So all research has limitations. What kind of data do we need? Do we need qualitative data, things like focus groups? Generally speaking, at the beginning, we're going to do things like focus groups that are going to tell us focus groups are great for getting a lot of input onto our product, maybe. They're not great in terms of what? Focus groups they'll tell you a lot about what people do or don't like about a product, but can you generally go and generalize from those focus groups or in-depth questions? So it's very difficult because it's a small subset of the population and it may not be representative. So qualitative, are we just doing exploratory research to find out what kinds of products people want? Or do we have an actual product that people can try and tell us and give us their feedback and rate, which would be something like quantitative data. Then we have to collect the data. Again, a population is defined as a well-defined collection of units. Generally, we're not going to get a census of the population. Most times we're going to take a sample. It can be difficult to get participants. This is another problem in marketing research, is that makes us more difficult than it is in physics. In physics, it may cost a lot of money. The equipment that you may need may cost a lot of money. If you're going to study, for example, if you're an astrophysicist, what do astrophysicists study? What is astrophysics? How many of you watch Big Bang Theory? You watch Big Bang Theory? You're the only one that watches Big Bang Theory. Nobody else in here watches. It's the most popular show on television. Huh? It's not with this group, apparently. You're not representative of the population in general. So what is Rajesh Kuthrapali, and since you know Big Bang Theory, what is he? He's a physicist. What kind of physicist? So Sheldon, he's an astrophysicist. Sheldon is a what kind of physicist? You know? He's a theoretical physicist. So he comes up with thought experiments. But astrophysics deals with space, planets, and things like that. So if you're going to be an astrophysicist, you may need really expensive equipment like telescopes, the Mars rover, things like that. But it's possible to get that. In marketing, one of the things that makes it difficult is that it may not be all that expensive. We can send out surveys, for example, on Mechanical Turk or online or over the mobile devices. Now you can opt into those. But getting participants, we can't force people to participate. If you have the right telescope, you're going to see the stars, whether they want to be seen or not. Right? If you have that ability to see it, you're going to be able to look at that body of data and make observations about planetary motion and stuff like that. Whereas we can't force you in marketing to participate. You can also get deviant responders, people who just do surveys and they just go through and, because if you get on Mechanical Turk, you get paid for doing surveys. You can get paid by Google to do surveys. I think Amazon will now pay you to do surveys as well. if you just start clicking answers, and that's a deviant responder, so not really reporting the way you actually feel about something. So what kind of data do we need? Secondary is already collected. The Census Bureau, for example, is a wonderful source of data. Before they open things like Outback steakhouses, they have to have a certain population, and that population has to be a certain demographic in terms of the income per capita in that area in order to support it. They know that, so they can gather secondary data, which is collected by people like the Census Bureau. You can also have secondary data that's already collected, for example, past sales reports and things like that. Primary data is collected for your specific project. Qualitative data is in-depth interviews, open-ended, free-flowing questions. Again, these can help you figure out and narrow, and you can usually start out with a qualitative research and then focus it more and develop methodologies to test it in quantitative. Consumer ethnography, actually looking at how people use stuff. One of the things that, for example, is interesting, as a marketer, I was on a plane coming back from when I was doing my doctoral studies at New Mexico State. I was on a plane coming back from Las Cruces, so I flew out of El Paso. There was a guy on the plane, and I said, "Oh, you got a new iPad." This was when iPads were still really pretty the newest and hottest thing on the market. So it was a goodly number of years ago. And he said, I said, "How do you like it?" He said, "Oh, it's great." He was down in Las Cruces. He was a vet. He was doing a presentation at, actually at New Mexico State, to the ag college there. And he said, they're made for business. And I was like, no, actually, that's not what Apple made them for. What did Apple make the iPad for? It was to be a cool toy to sort of serve, and it's not really a good business machine. But they became so popular among business executives that all, like my sister's company, when they first came out, bought them for all of, she worked for at the time, L3 Integrated Systems, and they bought them for all their executives. Are they really a useful business tool? They're not. Why?
Distraction.
It's a distraction, but what else that makes them not a useful business tool? They don't have a keyboard. Can you really put together a presentation really quickly without a keyboard? I mean, it'll come up, but can you touch type on an iPad? No. But that's how people are actually using them. They're using them in business for a lot of stuff. And so that's what consumers actually started doing with them. Quantitative is closed-ended, yes.
So in my PR class, my professor said the telephone interviews are like telephone communication are like the best tapping point to find like out information. Like it's the most effective. How true is that? Because I personally disagree.
I think there are lots of issues with telephones, and this has actually been documented. So, and I know this is as a political scientist before I became a marketer. There's a very famous picture of Harry Truman holding up, I think it was a New York Times paper, and it says, "Dewey defeats Truman." And Truman is smiling. And why was Truman smiling at this paper that had come out the night before the election? They had printed it the night before the election, and it says, "Dewey defeats Truman." Well, he was smiling because, does anybody know, was there a President Dewey? No, there wasn't a President Dewey. Who won that election? Truman. Truman won that election. And the reason that they had gotten it all wrong is they had done a poll. And how had they done the poll? Well, they had done it over the phone. And at that point in time, not many households had a phone. Not every household had a phone. Lots of households, if they had a phone, had a party line. If you were out in the country, so you had different people on the line. These still, by the way, existed when I was a kid. There were still places that had party lines. Not everybody had this device that was attached to them. And so that was a big problem, is they realized that the polling was all off because people were relying on a phone. Once every American household just about got a phone, it became more reliable because then you could randomize the numbers And then you have to do some things so that you randomize, because if every house just has one phone, like when I was a kid growing up, most households only had one phone, right? That was it. We were kind of unusual. We actually had, and my generation likes to talk on the phone because that was a big deal. My parents actually bought us our own phones, so we weren't constantly on their phone. I know this seems like a, caveman days for most of you, because you've never known anything other than having this device attached to your head. So once we got everybody with a phone, it became less of an issue, or everybody had access to a phone, it became less of an issue, because then we could randomize it. We would say, are there any people, under the age of 25 in your home? Is there a male under the age of 25? So we can randomize it. The problem with phone interviews now is that, there's a do not call list, which you can get around, obviously, because they do as a result of the Trump administration. Thank you for getting rid of the do not call registry, basically. But lots of people now have more than one phone. So a lot of people have, like my friend who is the district manager for Sam's, she has a personal phone because she doesn't want Sam's knowing what she's doing on her personal phone. I don't know what she had, serving porn, I guess, but she's got this Sam's phone, so she's got two phones now. She's got two numbers, which means that there's an increase. So lots of people have more than one phone as a result of things like this, and so it's also difficult in terms of data collection to get people who know how to read the script so that they don't bias the results, to be absolutely flat in their delivery of it. Yeah.
But never mind.
Okay. So I mean, I think there are pros and cons of phone interviews. There are pros and cons of doing it on the internet. Generally, you have to opt in. That means it's a convenient sample. Is there ways that you can get around that methodologically? Yes, there are. But you have to be very sophisticated in your methodological techniques to know whether or not you've got a statistically valid and sound number. All right. So quantitative closed-ended questions, statistical modeling, knowing what types of stats you need. Then you develop your findings using the appropriate methods. So one of the things that we use a lot of in marketing, and a lot of the marketing research, you'll see ANOVAs used or regressions used. What does ANOVA stand for? It stands for analysis of variance. So what it tells you, one of the things you have to be careful with, for example, in my own research that I've done on ethics and marketing, is ANOVAs will tell you if there are differences. So we use ANOVAs a lot in pre-test, post-test type settings, and that's what I've done in my own research. ANOVAs will tell you if there is a difference between the population, or before or after results, between this one and that one. They will not tell you which direction that difference is. It just tells you that there is a difference in the variance, right? So then you have to figure out which direction that's going. And you see this a lot. One of my colleagues and I are going through and analyzing medical research. And one of the reasons I really think that medicine is not much of a science after doing this is we're going through and we're looking at medical research on certain drugs versus the placebo. And a lot of those use ANOVAs, and so they'll give one case. So first of all, these are all convenient samples that they use in medicine. We don't selectively, if you wanted to have a true scientific sample, what would we do? Well, we say, you've been called up. We're going to give you this drug and see if your head falls off. I don't want to take the drug. Oh, too bad. We're going to give you the drug and see if your head falls off, right? That's not what we do. They use all convenient samples, but so they have a control group and a test group, right? So this is one of the big problems. Well, one of the things that we've noticed in our research is that they're using ANOVA. And there's a difference between the populations, but you don't know necessarily what difference. It could be worse. Their conditions could be worse afterwards, right? So understanding which types of tools are appropriate. Then you present your findings. These should be direct, not a mystery novel. I got a paper back one time that said, from a reviewer that said, it should not be like an Agatha Christie novel where you have to guess or wait till the end to figure out who did it. So you want to be direct and to the point. My mother often says to me, Grant, you're writing. My mother's an English teacher. She says, your writing is uninspired, and yes, but that's what I do. I'm not writing the great American novel here. What we're trying to do is, science. It should be understandable, and it should be brief. You should use the rule of parsimony. And then it does no good to just take your research and set it in a drawer and say, that's nice, that's interesting, and then go on about it. What do you want to do ultimately? What do you want to take actions based on the recommendations that you're making? Implement, and then evaluate whether or not you are successful, and then modify. So it's a continual process. Any questions about marketing research? All right, so for those of you who came in, yes.
So do we classify the life scale as an evaluation tool or as
It's a scale that's developed to measure differences among, and you can have multiple, there are different types of, some Likert scales are 5 points, some of them are 7 points, some of them are evenly balanced, and and deciding that is one of the critical things. So for example, if you have an evenly balanced Likert scale, so you have like 6 where you have 3 and 3, it forces people to choose. And a lot of people argue that for purposes of analysis, it's actually beneficial to force people to choose. So for example, one of the questions in political marketing that you'll see is questions about Roe versus Wade, the law that legalized abortion. If you give people a choice to say neutral, a lot of people will say I'm neutral, particularly men will say that they're neutral on that because they're never gonna have to face that choice. But almost no one is really neutral. Almost everybody has some, even if it's just slightly, one way or the other. And so that's an issue that you have to deal with in your research design. Do you want to give people the option of being neutral? Because a lot of, in things like that, a lot of men particularly will say, I don't, that's not my issue. I don't care about it. I'm neutral. Women should decide that issue, and I don't have much of an opinion. But almost everybody has an opinion, even if it's just slightly in one way or the other. Good question. If you talk, come up and get your points. You get the full 10 for answering that. For those of you who came in late, on Thursday, I will be going to a competition. We voted. We had a democracy, and I said I could either have somebody come and substitute for me and lecture, or because I record all of these, I can send you the video from last semester, and we all agreed that you all would rather me send you the video and watch it rather than come to class on Thursday. Is that right? Yes. So don't go running to the dean's office and saying you cheated me because I gave you an option. If you need to sign the roll sheet, there it is. We stop the.
Why are humans more likely to give machines information